Okay, so it is 6 o'clock and people will still be signing in because there's 24 people and we still have several that registered, but they'll come in and join. Again, I'm your host, Dr. Betsy Green, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a background on how this started and then where we go from here. So I, excuse me, I've worked with Ashley Wright, who is a area livestock agent for since I've been here. She started a little bit before me, but it's been what, 5 years? Coming up on 5 years.
Yeah, coming up on 5 years. In fact, I'm over 5 years. You're coming up on 5 years.
That's right. And we've done a lot of work together. We published some stuff on rabies and horse pubs, and I've done some work with her cattle people for their ranch horse care, you name it. But we started looking at, when COVID hit, we said, okay, we got to go virtual here. We were told no face-to-face whatsoever. So we actually started, see if I can find it here. Explore. 4-H home. And we're kind of doing this maybe by the seat of our pants a little bit when we started, but this 4-H ag at home. And we wanted to have opportunities to try and have people understand or have things that they could do. And there's another way to get to all of those. But so we started doing some videos, quick release knot. That's a great one. That's like 2.5 minutes. That gives you a new way to tie a quick release knot for your horse. There's pumpkin planting basics from Juan Arias up in Apache. He also did do-it-yourself water container. Got Gray Farrell up in Navajo. We've got Elizabeth Alden, who works with the Wallapai. She's a FERTEP agent or tribal extension person too. And then this one was for Ashley, because she actually made nipple drinkers for chicks. And so we actually did that, and grooming your horse as our first ones, and tying and things like that. And so when we thought, this is not going to last that long, how'd that go, right? So anyway, here we are. And we thought, okay, we want to provide some information that will engage our 4-H youth and anyone else interested in those species, and give them some opportunities to add to their knowledge base, but also recognize that, we needed to have stuff that, instead of just the science, we want to have the application of that science. So these are set up so that you have good information and then how to apply it, whether it's 2 or 3 speakers, it may depend on the topic. But so the structure is to focus on bringing science-based educational materials to our youth. And of course, everyone says, oh, STEM this, all of agriculture is STEM. I hate to say it. People forget. You guys that are involved in agriculture know that STEM is important in every aspect of agriculture. So Ashley and I put together this, and then we brought in Ashley Jeffer-Sample, who was a 4-H agent down in, I just lost, not Graham, Greenlee County, and said, okay, let's end this stuff with about a few minutes on what is that project about. And so from there, we have a solid based information application, and then some information on the projects as well. So we certainly hope that you enjoy this. And if you want to, while I switch this over and introduce our first speaker, if you could put in some of you guys have already been putting in it, but if you guys have rabbit projects, or if you're just interested in rabbits, or you just wanted to learn something new, okay? So you can put that in the chat, and I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and I'll let Dr. Peter Mundschenk share his screen, and he is the Arizona State Veterinarian. Okay, you're muted. There you go. There we go. And we'll let you share that screen. And he has been dealing with exactly what we're talking about and you're going to hear from him what it's like when it's your state that you and everyone looks to you. And then you're going to hear from Ashley Wright on some keys and tips for how to address or prevent potentially your own rabbits from getting sick. And then we will have some comments on 4-H rabbit projects in the last wrap up. So Peter, if you want to share your screen, you are ready to rock and roll.
I am missing the screen share section.
All panelists, try again. Do you see it?
It should be right there where you're talking and I'm not.
It's the green button that's lit up down at the bottom of the menu, about the center. You had it.
I had it when we started this. Technology is wonderful.
Yes.
Stop my video for a second. No, that didn't help. Okay.
All right, we got people coming in. I'm not sharing. All right, I'm going to stop share permission and then give it again and see if I can change it. Now try.
No.
No, you want me to pull up your slides?
One more section, one more
Okay.
shot there.
So we work with Dr. Peter Mundschenk quite a bit because the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension works with producers across the state with all types of livestock and, of course, horses and everything else. I'm the horse specialist. We don't have a extension beef or livestock specialist, but we're in the process of interviewing and hope we get one hired quickly. Still no luck?
I am just on either one of my windows not finding my.
Did you potentially maximize the screen? Because I know sometimes it hides under a menu if you don't have it maximized.
Okay. I don't have it maximized because I was trying to get to. Oh, there we go.
Ah, okay.
So.
All right, we see your slides. Perfect.
Perfect. All right. Technology.
Yes.
And I'm trying to figure out all the different ones because sometimes we get Zoom, sometimes we get Teams, sometimes we get WebEx.
I think WebEx is a pain. I think the other two are okay.
Yeah, WebEx you can't really do a lot with sometimes. So anyway.
Yeah. All right.
Like Betsy said, I'm the state veterinarian here in Arizona, and we had a little issue this year go on with Rabbit Hemorrhagic Disease, or as some people want to call it, Rabid Ebola. And I'll kind of point out some of the differences between the Ebola and the Rabbit Hemorrhagic Disease, because there's quite a bit of difference here. It was a real challenge working with disease outbreak in the midst of a disease outbreak and with another disease outbreak going on for our state vet office. So we had the Rabbit Hemorrhagic Disease, and you'll see a timeline coming up here shortly. But we had this going on right after COVID shut everybody down. And then right after this started up, we had vesicular stomatitis disease going on in horses all at the same time. So all in all, this last year, we did 148 foreign animal disease investigations. Rabbit hemorrhagic disease was considered a foreign animal disease. So that pretty much took us out to check all these animals and to look at everything. A little bit about rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus. It's a Khaleesi virus, so much different than the coronavirus that everybody knows about and loves and hates right now. And it is very highly contagious. One of the things that we see is with transmission can occur through direct contact, but you can also get indirect contact from animal products. So if there's a lot of urine or feces out in the environment, can easily be drug in to rabbits on their feet, and it does last for a long time in the environment. It's a very stable virus. We have two versions of rabbit hemorrhagic disease. We have rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus A or 1 and rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus 2, or sometimes called B. Depends upon the literature that you're looking at. We've known for years that rabbit hemorrhagic disease A does not affect wild rabbits. And then rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus 2, we did know that it does affect wild rabbits, but we just didn't know to what extent. But we can see mortality, morbidity, or sickness rates and death rates well over 90%. And we had a couple places this year that had had 100% of their rabbits die within a very short period of time. The one thing about this Khaleesi virus is it's very stable. It's stable in frozen meat. One of the places that we did diagnose it in was in frozen rabbits that they were using for pet store meat. So it had been frozen for up to about 3 months, and we tested that rabbit and it came back positive. This virus was first discovered back in 1984 in China. Hey, another gift from China. It's been confirmed in over 30 countries now since then. The Australians thought this is a great virus. We can bring it in and we can do population control. It worked for a while, and then they started finding resistant rabbits to it. And so that wasn't the total answer for everything. But from there, it got into France in about 2010 and all spread across Europe and the Mediterranean. So, and then, we've identified multiple genotypes of the virus going forward as it's kind of mutated and genetically drifted. And so we definitely now know that rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus 2 is totally different from rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus 1. So for those of you that don't know how many different types of rabbits we have here in the Southwest, we do have the black-tailed jackrabbit and the desert cottontail for a couple of them. And then we also have the antelope jack and the mountain cottontail rabbits here in Arizona. And we have found rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus 2 in all of these rabbits here in Arizona and New Mexico. So, and they had done some work with Wildlife Services and FADL back in about 2017, looking at the rabbit hemorrhagic disease in eastern cottontails and trying to figure out, and that's what we knew it kind of did affect them, but we didn't know to what extent. As we went through this, we had kind of a USDA has been really gracious, and they put together a timeline. As you can see, the first kind of outbreak that we had was in 2018 up in Vancouver, British Columbia. And then we'll just let this go forward, and I'll try to talk over it. So as the timeline goes along, then we started seeing an outbreak in the islands off of Seattle there, out into the Sound. There was a kind of an outbreak going on in the Washington area, and then we started seeing it in Ohio, and we diagnosed it again back in Washington State, in what they call feral rabbits. They're not really wild. They're domestic rabbits that have been turned loose out on the island. And then they had some more there in 2019. In 2020, we had in New York. And then you can kind of see that it just kind of exploded all over the Southwest. What we tried to do here in our office was we set up what we call Google Sheets. And out of the Google Sheets from the diagnosis, we can kind of do mapping from those Google Sheets. It's not a perfect thing, but as we started with it, red rabbits were domestic rabbits, brown rabbits were wild rabbits. What you're not seeing on this one is there's a wild rabbit buried under one of the red rabbits because they all happened at the same time. But then and this is over only about a month's period of time. So we started getting more and more calls, started seeing rabbits pretty much breaking out everywhere. And then we started getting a whole bunch more all the way up to Kingman. So it's pretty much spread the whole state. The one area we did not see it was La Paz County and Yuma. Those were two counties that were spared of it. All the other counties were pretty much infested with it. As you saw from that previous mapping that USDA did, it spread all the way down into Mexico. Now, when we first reached out to Mexico from Wildlife Services and we started seeing it here in New Mexico, we started seeing it in Arizona, we reached down to the Wildlife Services, reached down to their counterparts in Mexico, and they were like, no, we haven't seen it. No rabbit hemorrhagic disease in Mexico. Nope. But as you saw from that video, they blew up almost as fast as we did once they started looking for it. The next couple slides could be a little graphic, so I'll let people know that ahead of time. But it's pretty rare to be in the wild and be able to get this close to a wild rabbit out there. And these are pictures out of Sonora, Mexico that were sent to me to show that, yes, they're finding it down there. And what we're seeing is this rabbit is just kind of laying there. The next one should be a video that we can hopefully get to play. So as they're walking around this rabbit, videoing the rabbit, he's not moving off. He even takes and kicks a little dirt on this rabbit, trying to get him moving. Puts his foot over the rabbit, and the rabbit just stays there. So rabbit hemorrhagic disease is kind of a misnomer in the fact that everybody thinks that all these rabbits will be bleeding out their nose or out their mouth, and that's not often what we're seeing. Often what we're seeing is just the first sign that we see of a issue with rabbit hemorrhagic disease is the rabbit's dead. They go out and feed in the morning, come home from work, and the rabbit, one or two rabbits are dead. We had one place down in the south part of Arizona. They called in the morning, they had 2 dead rabbits. One of my assistant state vets went down there. By the time he got down there, there was 8 dead rabbits. So it can go that fast and that quick. And again, none of them may show signs of bleeding. They may show signs of bleeding out the nose, but they may not. And so this is kind of the dilemma that we have is, what are clinical signs? And how do we look at those? So we collect samples, we send them to the Foreign Animal Disease Diagnostic Lab in Plum Island, New York. So it's the only place that they can run these samples, and these samples are run, and we look for virus, PCR on the virus itself. A little bit about the epidemiology, and I know the right side of this slide looks pretty busy, so please ignore most of it except for what's going on there. But FADL, or the Foreign Animal Disease Diagnostic Lab, has done genetic sequencing on these different types of variants of rabbit hemorrhagic disease, especially from the outbreaks of 2018 to 2020. And the big take-home message from this is that the virus that we have circulating in the Southwest United States is distinctly different from the rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus 2 that was collected from domestic rabbits in New York, Washington State, and Ohio, as well as the British Columbia area. So if we look at this thing, we do have distinct separation of these two groups, which means we have two different viruses going, not two different viruses, but the same virus, but two different genetic isolates of this virus going on. As I said earlier, the one in Washington State is affecting feral rabbits out on the San Juan Islands. And apparently a lot of people used to take or love to take their rabbits and turn them loose out there on the islands when they no longer wanted them. So rabbits, being rabbits, will form colonies and breed and keep going. And so now they've had a couple of the San Juan Islands that have a whole population of basically domestic rabbits that are now feral and roaming free out there. So again, we don't know if this Washington, New York strain could actually affect wild rabbits or not, but we do know that there's some distinction going on there. A little bit more about the virus. It is a very hardy virus. It's an envelope virus, which a non-envelope virus makes it hard to kill. It can persist at room temperature for up to 3 months. And that's one of the things we don't know is rabbits out in the wild that have died, how long can those carcasses be infective? And what can happen with them? One of the reasons we recommended is if people see wild rabbits that are dead, that they bury them or incinerate the carcasses right away. They can survive freeze-thaw cycles. And as I said, it persists in frozen meat and carcasses, and we just don't know how long that persists. Probably would persist for longer than 6 months, because as I said, one of the samples that we collected from a place that was a high suspicion, we went back out and had to collect frozen carcasses from this lady because the fresh carcasses that we got did not come up positive, but the frozen ones did. Now, environmental temps of 122 degrees for 1 hour will kill it. However, even in Arizona, we don't get that hot. So it's going to be hard for it to, it could still survive, I guess is what I'm trying to say. The other thing is that we oftentimes will get infected rabbits that may not die from the virus, and they can be shedders of this virus for up to 2 months in some of the studies that have been done. And then again, can be detected in blood and feces for up to 15 weeks post-infection. So that's a long period of time. So they could still be the shedder. So it's kind of like in the old days when we call it the typhoid Mary, where they were actually out, somebody's sick, they're sick, but they're looking healthy, but shedding virus into the environment. The nice thing is it can be killed by bleach, but we also have to remember that in order to use bleach or one stroke or any of these disinfectants, we need a clean environment first. So we need to clean off the feces. Bleach on dirty feet, on feces in covered cages or anything like that will not work and will break down right away. So, and then the laboratory diagnosis, the only way we really have to do it is PCR. And we look at the samples from the liver and the spleen to look at that. So there's really not a good diagnosis for live rabbits to let you know if your rabbit's been exposed or hasn't been exposed. There isn't a ELISA monoclonal antibody test available, but it's not very good. And if the rabbits have been vaccinated, it's really hard to differentiate between the two. So
Dr. Mundschenk, we've had a couple of questions popping in here. And
okay.
if you're raising your hand, don't raise your hand, put your questions in the question and answer or the chat. So can this virus, I'll throw a couple at you and then you can take them how you want. So can this virus be spread through other animals? And can these rabbits be asymptomatic? Is there any cure or vaccine in progress? And you may say this is coming up, but is the rabbit virus?
All right, yes. some really good questions there. As far as rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus, it only affects rabbits and domestic and wild rabbits. It will not affect your dog. It won't affect the cats. It won't affect any other animals that go in contact with these rabbits. So that's, I should have mentioned that earlier. So that's a good question. And that was, what was the other one there? Let's see.
So is there a cure or vaccine in progress? Can the rabbits be asymptomatic? I think I was telling you about somebody, our neighborhood, that had thought people were poisoning rabbits and throwing them on their yard. And I handed off a article that Ashley Wright, who you'll hear from later, and others and Peter Hooper wrote and said, this could be what it is, but asymptomatic?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was trying to point out there on that one slide. Let me see if I can go back a couple slides here. So if we're looking at this, if it's detectable in the blood and feces for 15 weeks, again, we may have asymptomatic. They may have gotten infected, but didn't get enough virus to kill them, but they can still be shedding this virus for a period of time. And then I will get a little bit more down the road towards the end, a little bit about some of the questions that we don't know about as far as vaccine goes. So we'll hit that one coming up here. Bear with me on that one. If I still haven't answered it, somebody re-ping me on that. So the spread of the disease, one of the things we don't want is nose-to-nose contact between wild rabbits and domestic rabbits. We want them to be separated as much as possible. Some of the early outbreaks we saw were in 4-H rabbits, where they had taken the rabbits outside, put them on the lawn, let them play on the lawn. And that's all it takes sometimes for them to pick up the virus from where wild rabbits had peed or defecated on the lawn, and then the domestic rabbit becomes infected. So again, biosecurity, trying to keep them separated as much as possible, trying to work on lack of nose-to-nose contact. Some of the other ones that we had questions on, and this was a big question sometimes, is the feed, where the feed was coming from. Was the feed infected, or had the feed, had wild rabbits been out in the feed? I guess potentially if wild rabbits died out in a hay field or something and somebody baled it up, that hay could have a lot of virus present in it. And that's something you just need to watch and be concerned about a little bit. So a little bit, and this is kind of where we're going to get into the vaccine part here. The National Assembly of State Veterinarians put together an RHD working group right at the beginning of this onset, because there was a lot we didn't know. We had multiple states doing multiple different things, and we wanted to make sure that kind of everybody was working in the same avenue. As I mentioned earlier, it was a foreign animal disease, and under Arizona statutes rules at that time, the state vet was to require depopulation of any premise that had a foreign animal disease. Our rules were in the process of being changed, and they did get changed right about that in June of this year. So because of the fact that diseases like foot and mouth disease will probably be under control in some aspect with a vaccine program, we took out and made it so the state veterinarian may require depopulation. So now as we go forward, and what came out of the working group was a variety of options available for state veterinarians to work with to hopefully limit the virus issues, from everything from total depopulation and a shorter quarantine to keeping the animals that are still present with reporting deaths, and then a longer quarantine period with cleaning and disinfecting to happen at the same time. So we've done a variety of that here in Arizona. Currently, I think everybody has been on a long quarantine hold, and by long I mean we're putting you on a 6-month quarantine hold, because we don't want you moving around rabbits offer on that place, just because of the potential for that rabbit to be shedding that looks normal and looks healthy. And then we've been working with USDA, Center for Veterinary Biologics, to continue to promote development and testing of a US vaccine. There is no vaccine available in the US right now. Vaccine has to be brought in out of Europe. There's two companies, one in France and one in Spain, that make a vaccine. In Europe, the downside of that vaccine is the vaccine has to be passed through rabbits. They have to be sacrificed to make the vaccine. So there is some downside to that. And then the other side of that coin is they're not necessarily geared up to supply all of the US with vaccine. So what USDA did was develop guidance documents, and they came up with what we call stable endemic states or regions. And they came up with stable endemic because it's in our wild rabbit population now. So they have gone to saying that, we're probably not going to get rid of it. And then they have allowed vaccine to be available, purchased out of Europe, to be available for the stable endemic states and regions. So any state that's infected can get vaccine. States that aren't infected cannot get the use of the vaccine at this point in time. So again, that's one of the reasons we tried to get promotion of the US vaccine. There is a company in South Dakota that has been working on it. They're quite a ways into developing a vaccine. The problem is there's just not a lot of research money available for them to continue on with the trials at the university level, which needs to be done to get approval and show the efficacy of the vaccine as well as the safety of the vaccine. So they're looking for funding and looking for money to support that, but then there would be a US vaccine available that could be used in any state at this point in time. So, I think as we go forward, we still have more questions than answers sometimes. How did the virus get here and spread so quickly? Was it here and we just didn't notice it for a few years or for a year or so? We still have other diseases like tularemia that kills rabbits, so we have to think of those type of things. Which state is next? That's a good question. It's in California, Utah, Colorado, Arizona, Texas,
New Mexico, for sure.
New Mexico, and somehow has missed Oklahoma in that whole mess. So all these other states are trying to.
They got vestibular stomatitis, so they're good.
Yeah, they got more of that this year. So the question, could it be spread by predatory fowl feeding on an infected rabbit and then moving it north? That's always a possibility. We're not sure there's any migratory predatory fowl. How long has it been here? We haven't been looking at wildlife die-offs too well. So until this year, we really hadn't figured that it was a wild rabbit issue. So maybe it's been simmering in the wild population, and now this year just kind of blew up. The other question. Oh, go ahead.
So we got a couple of questions that maybe just if you can verify. I know that you said this, but maybe you can clarify. So questions like, can rodents catch the disease and spread it? And is there effects on certain breeds, more likelihood of them getting it? So maybe explaining the difference between spreading versus catching for our 4-H'ers on here.
So rodents would be a source of what we call a fomite, which they could get the virus on their feet, they can get in their hair coat, and then they could bring it into a rabbitry, especially if there's food available or there's food on the ground. They could go in and go up and climb up by the rabbits and spread it that way. Again, it's pretty specific for rabbits. And to answer the follow-up question, as far as the different types of rabbits, we've seen it in pretty much every type of rabbit. So there really hasn't been a predilection for one type of rabbit versus another type of a rabbit. On the East Coast, there's a couple wild rabbits that they're trying to put back into the wild, and they're kind of worried because if they put them back in there and it comes and they're an endangered species, what's going to happen to them? So they're trying to repopulate endangered species on the East Coast, and so there's been some concern about what to do with those as far as, you know, the virus getting in there. One of the things it's still an uncertain question. We've imported about 1,400 doses, and I think they ended up using like 1,200 doses of vaccine here in Arizona so far. But what we don't know, and what USDA doesn't know, and there's been no studies on this, is does the vaccines from Europe work against the new strain? And to be real honest, do the vaccines from Europe really even work? Because nobody's done any trial testings in the US on them. So the vaccine's available. We can bring it in. It's not an economical thing to do. It's fairly expensive because the vaccine itself, base cost is around $16 a dose from the company. And then you have to import it out of Europe. And then you have to get it into the United States. So it has to go through customs, has to go through a whole variety of things. So you need a customs broker to help broker it through. You have to pay for airfare or air shipment to get it over here and hope it gets here through customs and kept cold, because you can't use warm vaccine. The first 1,400 doses that made into Arizona did not follow that protocol as they were supposed to. The broker did not broker them out of LA into Phoenix, and they sat in a warehouse in LA and got nice and toasty warm by the time they got to Phoenix in 110-degree heat.
That's
So
a lot of money down the drain.
that was a lot of money down the drain. Luckily, there was insurance on it, so the clinic was not out that money. And it was about $14,000. So yeah, there was a fair amount of, you know, gnashing of teeth on that one. So, and we're not the only place. I've heard of a couple others so far that have had that same issue. So, you know, it'd be nice if we can get a vaccine here in the US, but I think it's going to probably require the rabbit industry to step up and say, we want the vaccine, we're going to help support it, we're going to help fund the final parts of the testing. So.
Okay, so we do have a question that I don't think you can answer, Peter. In my record book, where should I put these meetings? And that would be a question for your leader. But this is educational information, knowledge, and should definitely be put in your 4-H record books. So, all right.
And we do have one potentially loaded question for you that you maybe can and maybe can't answer, Peter. How likely is somebody's rabbit to get this disease? And that may actually lead right into what I'm about to talk about too. So.
Yeah, I mean, currently we have 4 investigations going on right now that I have samples sitting at the Foreign Animal Disease Diagnostic Lab. One of the things that when they became stable endemic states is that USDA then allowed states to authorize a lab in their state to do rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus testing without having to send them off to the Foreign Animal Disease Lab at Plum Island. We worked with U of A. It's probably not going to be economical. Colorado kind of came up with the same thought process that it wasn't going to be economical. We're trying to work with USDA to see if we can regionalize state-to-state testing and state-to-state agreements. They have not been real amicable about that, but a couple of us are still pushing for that so that we could ship samples from a practitioner or from an owner directly to the lab, like at New Mexico or Utah, who are both set up to do it. California is also set up to do it. So Texas did not set up to do it for a variety of reasons. Rabbits actually don't fall under the Texas Animal Health Commission's purview. They only, you know, so they had some issues in Texas trying to figure out who was responsible for testing rabbits, because, you know, it needs to be a foreign animal disease diagnostician to send them in, but at the same time, most of those are under Texas Animal Health Commission, which had no regulatory action for rabbits. So sometimes state laws get in our way. Everybody means well, but if it was cows, it would be one thing, but it was rabbits. So I never thought that I was going to be fighting a foreign animal disease in rabbits. So
Yeah. Well, I don't want to
Prepare
take away from Ashley's how to fix everything, right? You're going to tell us everything, how to fix it, right?
Well, maybe. I'm going to tell you how you can try to stop your rabbits from getting this.
Okay, and let's see if you have, I think you should be able to share.
I should be able to. I can revoke people's permissions to share, so that should mean I should be able to share.
Okay.
How'd we do?
All right, we are good.
All right, great. So let's transition from the disease itself to some biosecurity for the rabbitry. And we're going to talk about this specifically as it relates to this virus. But really, these sort of principles of biosecurity are really applicable to any disease that you might want to keep out of your rabbitry. There are other things that float around, like Pasteurella, things like that that rabbit people struggle with. And these things will really help no matter what you're trying to keep out. So first, if my slides will advance, which they are not wanting to. So what is biosecurity? You guys maybe want to throw into the chat what you think biosecurity might be. What does biosecurity mean to you? I'll give you guys a second here.
And some of these guys were at Dr. Bender's presentation, so they should have some good ideas. And while they're putting that in the chat, Ashley Jeffer Sample joined in on the questions and said, not sure about the new Zing Books record book, but in your old record book, it would have gone in your project record book under project activities, and describe it as State Ag at Home webinar, rabbits. So there you go.
Great, and I see some answers coming in here. Protecting your rabbits, guidelines to prevent or treat contamination, yes. And some of you are here to learn, and that's okay too. Keeping an animal healthy, yes, great. So biosecurity is anything that you do as part of raising your animals that helps prevent them from getting sick or from spreading disease. And so there's two really big ways we can do that. Number one, we can increase immunity. We can make it so that they don't get sick, right? So that's what we do when we vaccinate. We can also prevent exposure, so we can stop them from being exposed to the disease at all so that they don't get sick. So let me see. Always on the wrong screen here. There we go. So when we talk about increasing immunity, there's really two things we can do with that. We can support their immune system, right? So an animal that's healthy, that's being fed the right diet, that's getting the right things to eat, that's in good body condition score, meaning it's not too skinny, it's not too fat, or an animal that's living in a very low stress environment, so they have the right type of housing, those types of things. Those animals have a really good immune system, and so hopefully they can fight off some diseases without really any help. The other thing we can do is vaccinate, which Dr. Mundschenk talked a little bit about some of the issues with getting a vaccine for this virus, and hopefully at some point we'll have better access to that. But for a vaccine to work, we need that animal's immune system to be functioning, right? When we vaccinate, really what we're doing is we're stimulating their immune system to respond as if they got the disease and got sick, but they don't actually get sick. And that allows their body to make the antibodies needed to fight off that disease when they actually do encounter it. So we need both of these things. We need these animals to have a good immune system and be healthy in general. And like we just talked about, we don't have an approved vaccine yet. We are hopeful at some point we might. And we can, to some limited ability, bring in this one from other countries. So the other thing we can do, and really the only thing most of us have for RHDV right now, is to reduce exposure. That's keeping our animals from coming in contact with this disease. And so the level of control for any disease, when we talk about biosecurity, really depends on the seriousness of what we're trying to prevent, right? How contagious is it? If it's really, really contagious, we're probably going to need to take more steps. And in the case of RHDV, it's very contagious. Like Dr. Mundschenk talked about, it's really stable in the environment. That means that it lives for a long time on surfaces and things. And it's also not treatable at this time. If an animal is going to get sick and die from it, they're probably going to die from it, and it's fairly fatal. So that means that this particular disease, we really do need to take a lot of good steps to make sure that we're stopping it from coming into our herd. Whereas if we think about a different disease, if we think about, let's say, maybe ringworm, very contagious, but not necessarily very serious and somewhat treatable, right? So maybe we're a little less concerned about that disease. We take some moderate steps to prevent it from coming in. We wash our hands. We don't touch animals that may have ringworm. We don't bring other animals in. We can be a little less stringent, but when we talk about a disease like RHDV that's very contagious and very fatal, we need to take a lot of steps. Let's see, did we go? So let's talk about some basic, oh my goodness. Sorry. We need to talk about some basic terminology related to biosecurity. That was my dog, Andrea. He's having a fit and I'm not sure why. In fact, that's his picture up there. Some basic biosecurity terminology, fomites. So fomites are any inanimate object that might carry disease. I have a picture up there of my cleaning tools. It could be rakes, buckets, shoes, brushes, grooming equipment, anything like that that you might share between rabbits that's an inanimate object could potentially carry disease. When we talk about vectors, vectors are pests or other animals like the pesky Tucker who you hear whining in the background. If he tracks in and out of my rabbit tree and through wild rabbit poop that's out on the ground, he could track it into a rabbit tree. Wild birds, rodents, anything, flies can even transmit this disease. So those are vectors. And then quarantine. This is the process of keeping new or potentially ill animals separate from the main herd till they're no longer potential disease carriers. And I have a little bit more on quarantine and sort of the process for that at the end. Why don't you want to advance? There it goes. So how can we protect our rabbits from getting RHDV? Like we mentioned, it's very difficult, lives a long time in the environment. It's shed in things like urine, feces, respiratory droplets. As we mentioned, it can also be found in frozen meat from rabbits that have been infected. And it's transmitted a lot of ways. Rabbit to rabbit contact. So if your rabbit comes in contact with wild rabbits, through ingesting feed or water that's been contaminated, maybe wild rabbits can get into your feed bin. Maybe wild rabbits can get into your hay supply that you feed your horse, or that you feed your horses, and also maybe give a little bit to your rabbits now and then. Through vectors such as flies, other animals, and through fomites if you share equipment with any other rabbitry. So that means we really have a lot of opportunities to accidentally introduce this disease into our rabbit barn. And so instead of going through all those things with you, I kind of want you guys to go through a little activity with me. I have two scenarios here. And what I'd like to do is I'm going to read this and I'm going to have you guys put in the chat how you think Betsy's rabbits got RHDV. Okay? So Betsy doesn't allow visitors or other animals into her rabbitry. Her rabbits are in hutches in an enclosed building. She washes her hands and cleans her rabbitry. But on Sunday, she lets her rabbits have some playtime on the floor of the rabbitry while she cleans and gives them each a handful of Bermuda hay from the horse barn. On Thursday, she finds one of her favorite rabbits dead and several others exhibiting signs of RHDV. And how could she have introduced the disease?
I've been crying ever since. So we're going to run out of time. So if you want to do your next scenario and they can do both.
Okay, yeah.
Because we also have a little 4-H.
Yep, while you guys type those in, I'll read scenario number 2 and you can type that one in as well if it will go. There we go. Brad has taken extreme steps to prevent RHDV, keeps his rabbits indoors, maintains a closed herd, changes his shoes, washes his hands, and has fenced wild rabbits out of his entire property. But because his rabbit room is enclosed, he leaves the window open to help with ventilation, and his cat comes in to help with rodent control. Despite his cautious approach, he finds 3 rabbits dead this week, all with signs of RHDV. How could Brad have gotten RHDV? What do you guys think? I see the cat. I saw the hay. I saw feet. Yes, feet. Very good. I saw flies and rodents. You guys got it. You nailed it. Those are all the ways that that disease could have gotten in to those herds. Wonderful. So there are some recommendations for RHDV prevention. You can find these 2 places as well. You can find them on the Arizona Department, the State Vet's Office website has a fact sheet. And then also the fact sheet link that Betsy dropped in the chat has these things as well. So the recommendations for making sure that you keep RHDV out of your herd Maintain a closed herd. No visitors, no visiting rabbits, no visiting other people's rabbitries. Don't allow people who have rabbits to come visit you right now. This is not a good time to be having rabbit play dates, okay? House rabbits off the floor. Don't allow them playtime on the floor. Remember, you can track this in with your shoes if you've walked through your yard where wild rabbits have been. Quarantine new or returning animals. We'll talk about quarantine real quick. Control your food storage. Don't forage items from outside. No grass, no hay, no limbs, tree. You know, people like to feed mesquite branches and things like that. All of those things are potential for contamination, and make sure that your feed is stored in such a way that rodents and other pests can't get to it. Pest control, make sure you're keeping those rodents, flies, wild birds, pets out. Put screens in your windows, screens over your ventilation, all those types of things. And finally, sanitation. Keep that rabbitry very clean. Wash your hands. Don't wear clothing or anything else that may have touched a wild rabbit. Change your shoes or use a foot bath. I highly recommend just having a specific pair of shoes that only goes in the rabbitry and goes nowhere else. That would really be the ideal way to do that. And finally, when we talk about quarantine, what this is a separate place to house those animals. Ideally, a separate room or building. Don't share equipment, food, or supplies between these animals and your regular animals. Care for those quarantine animals last. If you care for them first and then go to your regular animals, you've completely broken quarantine and you've potentially contaminated if they have something. So feed your animals first, your quarantined animals last. Wash, change those clothes. Monitor those quarantine animals carefully. Typically, quarantine depends on the disease, 21 to 30 days. If the state vet puts you under 60 days or under 6 months, you're under 6 months. But typically, if you don't suspect disease, this is just a cautionary thing for new animals you've brought in. 21 to 30 days is typically the standard, okay? And with that, I think I got us back on time.
Yeah.
Questions? I'm sure this group has a lot of questions.
So as they start getting their questions in chat and question and answer, please let me introduce Karen Donaldson Webb. She's a 4-H small stock leader from Gila County who can share some 4-H information about rabbits. And you should be elevated to a panelist, so you should be able to speak.
I think I need to stop share.
Do you want me to speak now?
Yes, because we have so many questions, so we just want to make sure we get
filling in. So I don't have anything prepared, but I do really want to encourage people to keep rabbits. I don't want people just. This disease is terrible. I have a personal friend whom I've bought rabbits from for a decade who lost her entire herd of well-loved, well-cared for rabbits to this disease. We've just got to be careful. And I think your cross-contamination and that kind of thing is what the best thing we can do to protect our herds. But I would really like to encourage members, anyone, to keep rabbits as pets, to keep rabbits as 4-H projects. I think they're an ideal entry-level 4-H livestock project for just a whole lot of reasons.
And so if I wanted to, I'm younger than I look. If I wanted to start a 4-H rabbit project as a 4-H'er, what kind of things do I have to do or know right off?
Well, of course, there's a ton of great research out there that is easily approachable on the internet. But if you're a member, your leader is going to be your best first resource is your leader. The one piece of advice I like to give families is spend the money and buy a purebred pedigreed rabbit. I don't mean registered. We don't generally register rabbits, but it's very disappointing for a youth to fall in love with their rabbit and learn everything about it and take great care of it and go to their first rabbit show and find they can only show in the pet class because their animal isn't pedigreed. Let's take this serious. And while we're buying the best food and a good cage and all these other things, let's invest in a purebred rabbit too.
Okay. And so then do I have to keep the rabbit at my house?
You should have the rabbit at your house. They require enough care and attention that you really have to see them a couple times a day. In Arizona, I really recommend when you've got 1 or 2 rabbits, you really ought to be keeping them in the house. I have a barn on my property for the rabbits. I have a secondary barn for animals in quarantine. I actually have 2 separate, but everybody doesn't have that much space available. But okay. You should have it at home. It's not something you're going to board out with someone.
Okay, so we have, okay, so we're not going to have time to introduce individuals. I'm sorry, but because we went on with good information. So those of you that want to show your rabbits off, you'll have to do that offline here. But do you have any other questions for any of our speakers? For Karen, for Peter, for Ashley?
I do see one question that's been asked that I was hoping Dr. Mundschenk would answer. I'm going to punt it to him about the testing procedure to have rabbits tested for the disease. And you're muted, just in case you didn't know.
There we go.
He's hiding. Oh, putting his headphone in.
So you can hear me.
Yes, better.
Yeah, actually the only test that we really have right now is on the deceased rabbit. So the rabbits that have died, we collect livers on, and those livers get sent back to the Foreign Animal Disease Diagnostic Lab where they run PCR on those. It was kind of interesting listening to Karen talk about keeping rabbits indoors. One of our cases in Mesa this year was actually a pet indoor rabbit that died suddenly. They took it to the took it to the veterinarian. It died in the veterinary clinic. Suddenly they suspected rabbit hemorrhagic disease, called us in visiting with them. And this is kind of how bad things can happen. And it just can be that quick and easy. The cat killed and brought in a baby rabbit from outside into the house. And they cleaned it all up, took it all out, thought everything was safe and clean, but apparently the domestic rabbit came in contact with some fluids from the wild rabbit that the cat had caught. So again, biosecurity, I'll hit on Ashley saying it, you can't be too careful. So if wild rabbits do get in or something happens, make sure you're cleaning, disinfecting, again, really well with bleach or something, that if you can do that. So but yeah, the only test we have currently is post-mortem testing.
And I do see, I'm sorry, Betsy, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, you go.
I do see we have another really good question. Can Lysol kill the disease?
Actually, Lysol will not work. So the ones that I listed there are about the only ones that are approved for use in rabbit hemorrhagic disease at this point in time.
All right, and then it's just been asked a couple of times, so I just want to make sure we have clarification about giving rabbits things like twigs and pine cones and stuff from outside to chew on, and that's probably not recommended right now. It would be better to not forage items from outside that could have contacted wild rabbits, fluid, anything like that. Probably not a good thing.
Yeah, again, like I tried to mention, that virus is very stable in the environment. There's a lot of questions we still don't know on how stable and how long it can be. Short of setting up with infected rabbits, getting forage, and then seeing how long we can reinfect rabbits, which most people don't want to do. So, but again, trying not to scare everybody. Kind of like Karen said, I think rabbits are fun. They're good. I've not recommended shows this year, though, just because of the fact that if we do have a rabbit that goes to a show that isn't showing clinical signs but is shedding the virus, again, can be for 4 months, they may infect other rabbits at the show. So.
Do we have any last questions? Thank you so much, Karen and Peter and Ashley, for giving us some great, solid information. Should you be worried? Yes. Okay. So, and my puppy said that she's cuter than Ashley's puppy. So she's been in her bag resting all day. So she's been a very good little Jack Russell. But any last questions? So you will receive an email thanking you for joining us tomorrow and you'll receive the email tomorrow, and it will have a link to a Qualtrics, an easy survey. It really will help us if you will go ahead and fill that out for us, and it gives you an opportunity if there are things that you want to hear about. Obviously, you can look at our list before, and there's information on the swine webinar, which is upcoming next on December 3rd. And both this and that for sure will be available on that 4-H Ag at Home site in a little bit, so that if you missed it or if you want to get a refresher on it, then you will be able to watch it again or share it with somebody. Okay, so, all right, did we get the question typed in there, Ashley? I saw that.
I'm still looking for it.
Okay.
Okay.
Can washing your rabbits prevent the spread?
No. It will decrease the amount of virus on them, but if they've already picked it up or they've already come in nasal contact with another rabbit that's infected, they will still be infected. So again, kind of like Betsy said, I'm worried about rabbits right now, but I think with some good biosecurity and some good cautiousness and people being aware of things, I think that's helpful. We can't get masks on rabbits, but we can kind of take some of the lessons from COVID going forward too. Being a little bit cautious about how we work with our
interpreter. Okay, I'm not sure which are we looking at, Ashley.
Andrea, I'm not sure I understand your question about. I'm sure you can hear Tucker getting a drink of water right now. Thank you. Great timing. I don't really know. Can you soak water in it and let it? I'm not sure I understand your question, Andrea. Can you maybe try to clarify for us real quickly?
So the point is, bathing them or soaking them is not going to decrease the effect because they've already been exposed to the virus.
Right.
Now, Peter, if I was worried that, where my favorite rabbit died because I was giving hay from the barn and those wild rabbits always hop in and get some of that hay, and I just was giving treats to my rabbits, do I have to completely clean out, or are all my rabbits going to get the hemorrhagic?
Very good question, Betsy. Actually, if you have a rabbit that dies, and I should have mentioned this, we request that you contact our office. You can contact us through the office line or at diseasereporting.azda.gov and let us know, and we will get those rabbits tested. There's no cost for the testing of the rabbits to Arizona residents right now because they're still all going to the Foreign Animal Disease Diagnostic Lab. But not all rabbits that die had Rabbit Hemorrhagic Disease. We'll just throw that out there. We haven't really had a positive case now for about 3 months. As I said, we had 4 new investigations going on right now of moderate concern, but yeah, it's just a matter of let's find out if that's the case. And if the other ones, again, cleaning and disinfecting. If we do have one that died of rabbit hemorrhagic disease, let's clean and disinfect everything around those other rabbits. And we've had a lot of them where they've been able to maintain their rabbits for that period of time.
Okay, so probably my one that died, you'll test. The one, because I call or email you guys. The 3 that are acting weird are probably gonna probably have it and will die, and you'll test. And if I'm quick about things, there's a possibility that I may be able to save the rest of my rabbits.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I don't have rabbits. I have a fuzzball.
I did raise rabbits when I did 4-H, but that's been a while.
So we want to thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. And we are going to go ahead and end this because we are at 7:04. But if you have any other questions, please let us know. And there is also lamb and goat and beef and all kinds of stuff on the list. So check the schedule. You can sign up for those now. And a couple of horses because, hey, I'm the horse person. So anyway, you guys have a wonderful evening. And thanks so much again, Peter and Ashley, for joining us, and Karen as well for giving us a little 4-H intro. Very helpful.
Thanks for putting us on, Betsy.
All right, you bet. We'll see you
Bye.
guys down the road.